Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for tuning in to my conversations bridging arts, culture, and community. Today, I got a special conversation with a special guest who, for the last 30 years, has been a Harlem-based painter with works exhibited worldwide, known for his quote-unquote lowbrow conceptual art, which reflects an ambivalence about American culture. He's covered subjects ranging from gangster rap to sports and to New York culture. Please welcome Tom Sanford. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Rob. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. I've been listening to your podcasts and, you're an interesting character, man. During the Knicks playoffs, they had this meme like on Instagram, right, where they were sort of comparing Jalen Brunson to that song from Hamilton, like about how writing the Federalist Papers, John Jay got sick, so like that was like Julius Randle going down, and then I don't know, was it James Madison, I guess? Like he wrote a bunch of essays, but then Hamilton wrote the other 51 or whatever it was. It's like Jalen Brunson, like kicking ass in the playoffs. And I was just thinking, like, as I've been listening to your podcast the last couple months, you've seen it come out with one like every 20 hours. And I don't know how you do this, because I have had a podcast or helped with a podcast in the past, and I know how much work it takes to get one of these things together. And I just don't know where you find the time, man. But anyway, it's a real pleasure. I feel like I know you if I listen to 50 hours of you talking at this point, but it's cool to be on here with you now. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's really dope. And I will say, when you mentioned the Knicks, right? So looking at your work, and we're definitely going to dive into it, but I just want to at least say this while we're on that subject. Looking at some of your work and then following it and then following you and then having, sharing the pod and having you come on and inviting you on. And in some ways, it really reignited my love for the Knicks, if I'm being honest. I'm here. I got the wild VPN. I'm in the Middle East or something. I was like, let me watch this Knicks game real quick during the playoff run.
Well, it was a fun playoff run. Of course, it's a shame that it's over, but I can't complain about the season we had, especially given all the injuries and that sort of thing. I think the Knicks are suddenly like the most lovable team in the NBA. How can you dislike this Jalen Brunson, this guy who having a son who loves to play basketball, and he's a 5-foot white kid, and I'm seeing Jalen Brunson play, and I'm like, this guy has no physical gifts that you won't have. He's just the hardest working, most disciplined, smartest player in the game, and he's become arguably the best guard in the game. So, and he's just also just such a great guy. He never says the wrong thing, takes total accountability for his team. He's just the kind of nerdy dad basketball fans perfect hero. I just love the guy, and the rest of the team as well. But Brunson's amazing.
Absolutely. And it was definitely very fun to watch, and not having a team here in Baltimore. We have one close with the Wizards, but for that time, it's like I'm going to be following the Knicks a bit more, and also making it a point to get back up there to New York a bit more. As I was saying before we got started, I definitely felt the love, and that's in how we got connected. So it's just great. So as we start off with the, sort of beginning, we're going to switch the gears from, sort of like basketball a little bit to the art side of things. So before we get into the deeper, more introspective questions, could you share, if you will, your first art experience, whether it's in the appreciation, whether it's in the making, or just general awareness of art creativity?
Well, I just want to, you haven't mentioned my glasses yet.
I'm going to.
Okay. All right. Anyway, yeah. So how did it all start? I don't know, I have recollections of my childhood, but they aren't that strong. I'm 50 years removed from being born now almost. But when my father's asked this question, what he says is that most kids start drawing when they're 3 or 4 years old, and they probably stop when they're 8 or 9. But Tommy, he calls me Tommy just kept on drawing. And probably the reason that was it goes back to like having like a little bit of affirmation early on. I think like I remember, and this is one of my earlier memories. Like when I was in the equivalent of kindergarten. I went to school in England when I was young. I'm not British, but my parents, my family were moved to England when I was 3 years old because my dad had a job that moved him there. And so I was in the equivalent of like kindergarten, and it was kind of like it was some sort of like after school or extra week of school. So I remember it was around Easter time, and it was like it wasn't really school, but it was like kind of like the equivalent of camp or something, or daycare. And they decided to have a drawing competition, and I made a drawing of a guy with a parachute on, if I remember correctly, and I won the competition. The drawing was probably not very good at all, but I got in my head that I was pretty good at drawing because I won this little art competition in my class. And so I just kind of went with that, and I kept on drawing. And all through elementary school, and then when I came back to the States in middle school and high school, I was, one of those. I was kind of like the drawing guy in my class. I had another friend, this guy Will Stevens, who was like my dearest friend from middle school, who was also really into art. And he was like a kind of comic book guy, and he introduced me to like Marvel and DC and all that sort of stuff. I was never really into reading comic books, but I certainly loved to copy the drawings, and that's how I like learned anatomy, like kind of the Marvel style. Initially from copying things, and then eventually, you sort of through osmosis kind of pick it all up, and you can kind of fake it yourself. Like when asked, I always and tell people, learn to draw by copying stuff, because like that's how everyone learns everything. The way that one learns to paint is by going to the museum and trying to work out how artists do things, and reworking them and redoing them. Most of your audience are probably other artists, and they probably can identify with this. Like when I go into an art show or museum, it's not such a soulful experience. It's more like me like looking at stuff and trying to work out how they did it, and steal their secrets, and like maybe I'll use that in a painting. That's kind of how I evaluate art now, or maybe not so much anymore. Maybe probably certainly when I was like kind of a little younger and sort of trying to work out what I was doing, but. Anyway, that's a long way of saying that my family is in no way antagonistic to the arts, but we weren't the kind of family who were going to museums on the weekend. It was just like not particularly my parents' interest, but I kind of just became like the drawing guy, and I was never, in my opinion, in retrospect, like one of the better art kids in my school or my class, but I was pretty committed to it, and eventually you do it for long enough, you kind of have to stick with it.
No, thank you. And one fellow, like the art kid growing up, especially a bespectacled one. And I must thank you for wearing your glasses for this interview.
If I wasn't wearing them, Rob, I couldn't see you. I'm really blind.
As a person who's worn glasses since 3, yes.
Yeah, I think seven or so in my case. But yeah, I got a pretty substantial prescription. I think I'm 6.0 and 6.5 at this point in my respective eyes.
Yeah, it's just all astigmatism, because it's, as my partner says, she was like, when you take your glasses off, your eyes disappear like a drawing. I was like, that's spicy. But yeah, it's really cool, and thank you for sharing sort of the early stages, sort of that first stage, because when I think of sort of creativity, for me, this was sort of the second, if not third, sort of attempt at something creative, and I've stuck to it, and I've loved it. I've done podcasting in earnest for about 15 years, but there are other moments early on where it was just a jerk with a microphone, the little handy recorder, and capturing conversations, capturing things that I thought was funny, things that I would never play now as a 39-year-old. It's like, no, can't do that. Can't put that one out there. That is stupid. That's just not good from a production standpoint. But even the drawing piece, right? And I like that you're touching on sort of like how you might look at something now. How does that get made? How did they do that? I was one of those kids that would try to draw Wizard, the covers from like Wizard magazine back in the day. That was what I was into. And even now, and some of the research that I do and kind of getting inspiration for questions, it's gentleman thievery. You're just stealing. We're just stealing, in one way or the other, but we're putting our own turn on it, our own spin on it to
Yeah,
make it
it's like
art.
Jonathan Lethem said. It's culture is a book. It's like everyone makes their own page, and like we're all reacting to stuff in the past. It's not thievery, like the history behind you is all is your property in a way as an artist or a creator. Our notions of intellectual property in our kind of legal culture are way out of whack. Like all these rulings against Warhol for the Prince photograph or whatever the case may be. No one is creating in a vacuum, and everything is stolen, and that's the beauty of and the power of human intellect. Like we are a big kind of hive mind. We're all working with each other's past efforts, and that's the kind of beauty of culture.
Yeah. And, when I'm doing this, and definitely I have something that's sparking some interest from me that I see in the background for you. But, and folks reach out to me and they ask me, how do you do this? How do you do that? What do you use to record? I don't gatekeep the information. Information's to be shared. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. And if someone is goodly enough to ask me a question around it, it's just like, hey, and having that approach has opened up the opportunities to educate, to literally be a teacher. And, during the summer, I'll have like Professor Rob Lee will be a title, because I'm going to be teaching at a college, and that feels like really cool. And in speaking with folks about it, and just like, sharing with them, this is not something, that's new or groundbreaking that only I'm goodly enough to do. This is something that you all can do, and really making it relatable in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I see Don Mattingly behind you. I see Donnie Baseball behind you. So I
Yeah.
gotta ask, could you, if you will, describe your current work, sort of like the process, and sort of like ultimately what is it about? Like, I see sort of quote unquote the lowbrow thing. I see, the references to rap music. I see the references to sports, obviously, and New York culture overall. And like I said, I fell in love with that, like all of that sort of stuff. And then diving in, I was like, this is great. So describe your work.
Well, I don't really have an elevator pitch. Whenever I'm asked this, it gives me some of anxiety because I'm really trying to work it out myself. Um, Over the years, I guess, have followed my interests, and my interests are common interests with many people. Like at the moment. At least over the last couple of years, I've sort of become like a de facto semi-pro Knicks fan, and it's just a strange turn that my career has taken. And one thing that I've always done is try to follow any rabbit hole that pops up for me as far as I can. In most basic terms, I make pretty conventional paintings. Like wall paintings, easel paintings, sometimes murals. They're made with acrylic paint. I didn't always work with acrylic paint. I used to paint with oil, but I made the decision maybe about a decade ago to switch over to acrylic for mainly practical reasons. They're idiosyncratic but practical. Like one of the reasons was that I in order to like not become like a big balloon of a human being, I try to exercise every day, and I have a rowing machine. And for a while I had my rowing machine in my wife and I's bedroom, and
Yeah.
she was getting sick of that, and so she wanted me to move it somewhere else, and like the only like practical place to put it was my studio. And so I thought, well, it wouldn't be great for me to be like breathing heavily with lots of turpentine in the room, so I should probably consider acrylic paint. And the other thing is my paintings, they've always looked pretty plasticky anyway, even when I painted with oil. Like 15, 20 years ago, I was making slightly different paintings. They were more of the hip hop paintings back then. They were kind of like, looked like lowbrow Renaissance paintings, where I would, maybe I would put in Tupac where Jesus might be in like a Van der Weyden painting or something like that. Or I might remake like a Caravaggio about like, some sort of historical, not historical in a very short-term sense, image of something that happened in popular culture. But more recently, so I'm painting in acrylic. And the other thing about acrylic paint, which if you're a painter, you would know, it kind of forces you to be a little bit more direct. Like, because things dry quickly, you can't really massage the paint on the canvas, which makes it a little bit more like a drawing process, in that you're not adjusting things. You know, you can use transparency to make transitions and fades and things like that, but you really can't do it through laboring on the canvas, which makes it, you have to kind of go with your mistakes, in a way, and it makes you move more quickly as a result. And I feel like certainly half of my life is gone, and I've got a lot more paintings I want to make. So if I can get these things done a little quicker, that's wonderful, and acrylic can help with that. But on subject matter, which I think is more of the point of the question, about I kind of make paintings about stuff I'm interested in my life, the popular culture, the people around me, the places around me. But about 3 or 4 years ago, this guy Marcello Ricci, who's a wonderful guy, who was a gallery down on the Lower East Side called My Pet Ram. He just opened his art gallery, and he's a big basketball fan too. And he wanted to do an exhibition about for the NBA playoffs. And he knew that I'd made a bunch of paintings over the years about the Knicks, or of maybe not so much about the Knicks, but of Knicks players, heroes of mine, things like that. And so he asked me to make a painting for the show. And I made a painting of, like kind of the most popular Knick, the best Knick, Walt Frazier. It was like kind of like a painting of Clyde with his fedora on, and, he was in front of a Rolls Royce, and like he's got the Puma Clydes, and, it's like, and I called it, Clyde, like the flyest man on earth or something like that, or Clyde So Fly. I forget exactly what the name of the painting was. But the point is, that painting got, a little bit of play on like Knicks Twitter, which is a real institution, and it led to that. The thing got sold from the show, but then another guy really liked the painting and was a big Knicks fan, and he wanted it, but I wasn't available, and so he commissioned me to make a painting. And this guy, he has 3 children who he named after the sort of New York Trinity. He named one after Earl Monroe, one after Walt Frazier, and one after Willis Reed. They're middle names, they're middle names, not so. There's like one of them had the middle name Monroe, middle name Frazier, middle name Reed, and so that painting that I made for him, which was a painting of these guys like they were kind of playing at Rucker Park or something like that, but they're in their Knicks uniforms. It caught the attention of the Knicks, and they put him on a TV commercial during Knicks games with his kids, like was super cute, and his wife, and he's like talking about how he grew up loving the Knicks, and he named his kids after them, and he got this painting made of these players that he loved. And I guess during the interview, whoever was filming it or directing was like, wait, who made this painting? And so they ended up coming to me, and they made a commercial about me as well. And from there, I sort of became like a recognizable Knicks fan. And there's this little ecosystem of sort of semi-pro Knicks fans, people who like do fan engagement stuff, or are just like have incredible collections of Knicks memorabilia and things like that. And so I kind of got involved with that, and like I just started getting a lot of sort of engagement from Knicks fans, and it was really interesting, and I really appreciated it, because frankly I much prefer to hang out with Knicks fans than like art world people, and talk about the Knicks, as opposed to bitch about real estate. That's what people do in the art world, and so. That was pretty dope, and it just like led to a whole bunch of stuff, and eventually I hooked up with this guy, Steven Delikian, who has this really incredible Instagram profile called Bacher Backpages, where like after every Knicks game, he would make like a fake like kind of back page of the tabloids sort of headline about the Knicks game the night before, with like kind of a jokey rework of like a movie poster or a hip hop album or something like that about what happened the previous night's game. So like Deuce McBride had a big game, he might do like a Deuce McBride, Deuce Bigelow, male. I don't know, like what his like he does all these kind of funny headlines. Anyway, so Steven asked me if I might want to collaborate with him and make some T-shirts and stuff, and so we started doing that, which like very quickly started taking up a lot of my time. But was super cool though. It wasn't like an incredibly good money making scheme. However, we have had some T-shirts that really kind of blew up in the New York area. This one particularly,
Yeah.
my Captain Clutch T-shirt here, is probably the most this season, maybe the biggest like unofficial, unlicensed piece of Knicks merchandise out there. I'm hoping that I don't out myself and have the Players Association come after me now. But it was just super fun doing that sort of stuff. But so in the process of this couple of years process, I've just ended up making more paintings about New York sports because for me, like I think a lot of American men of my generation, just men generally, like I can really only express my emotions through sports. Like my wife always tells me, like, or tells me, like, the only time I ever see Tom cry is during sports movies, or like during the playoffs, or any Knicks game. Like I'm sitting in my basement in front of my iPad, yelling at the thing, and the ecstasy that I feel after even like the smallest Knicks win is greater than any drug or any alcohol. It's it's not an uncommon condition to be like to kind of put all your passions into sports, but I definitely enjoy doing that, and I love the kind of weird culture of American sports very much. Like it can be a little bit cringeworthy and ultra macho, but on the whole, there's a lot of love and passion and excitement about sports, and that excites me.
Yeah, I mean, my partner. Thank you for that because definitely it adds a lot in there. It makes me now as far as revisiting because I'm going to be diving in because you know diving in a bit further because I got the link to your website and I was just going through. I was like, it's a lot of stuff in here. Um, so and criticism in there too. Wink, wink, hint, hint. But as we kind of look at some of the like influences and are what influences come to mind like for you when you think like, okay, I really like this particular person's work or what have you. When I do this and it's always funny when I talk to certain folks, depending on where their background is. If they're a fine artist or curator or what have you, they come at me from one perspective. If they're more on the sort of cultural end of things, they look at me from this perspective. I've heard anything from Nardwuar to not Larry King as much, but maybe James Lipton. I've gotten anywhere from that sort of spectrum as far as interview style, right? And or even Charlie Rose. One of my buddies like, you got a Charlie Rose thing going on with you. Who are your influences? What have you lifted, if you will, from them? Was it style? Is it sort of the way that you depict?
Well, I guess visually, my stuff is relatively lowbrow. There's obviously like kind of a comic book or cartoon sensibility, and I got a lot of that stuff from comic books and as I mentioned earlier, drawing from them.
Sure.
And also when I was younger, growing up in England, there was this, you wouldn't know what this is, but there's something called the Beano, which was a kind of a comic book. It was like a hardcover comic book, but they also had some softcover ones as well that I guess you get weekly. It was just like a comic that I liked to read. It wasn't not a superhero comic book. It's about kind of kids and doing pranks and stuff like that. So those are kind of early influences. And then as I like learned more about art and kind of picture making generally, I guess like most of my influences I think are relatively obvious. Like I when I was kind of a college age, I was really into Peter Saul, who's an American painter who is pretty well known these days. He's become more popular later in life than he was back then. Obviously there's a lot of like R. Crumb in my work. Like there's a lot of self-deprecating anxiety. That's really like many artists. That's part of my sort of driving force. A lot of my influences kind of came from people that I interacted with or worked for. Like when I got out of college, I was an art major, and if you're an art major from any college that you may have gone to, you either basically have to become an artist or get used to flipping burgers. because I didn't, I wasn't going to be able to get a job. So I ended up working for artists, and one that was particularly influential on me was this guy Alexis Rockman, who is an incredible painter who makes art that's kind of about our culture's imagination about the environment and science fiction sort of put together. Like he makes paintings that when he first started making them, like in the 1980s, seemed like apocalyptic futures, and now they're what's actually happening. But he's an incredible technician. I worked for him for several years after I got out of school, and really learned a ton from him. Also, another artist that was important to me was this lady Deborah Cass, who I worked for several years after school. Other artists that are really influential on me, like on my style or the way I think about things. Like I really like the work of this guy named Ashley Bickerton, who recently died of cancer, but he was one of the East Village artists who kind of came out of the kind of Neo Geo scene of the late 1980s, like him and Meyer Weissman, Jeff Koons, who else, various others I'm blanking on because I'm nervous, but I guess I could keep on going. I really like German expressionism. People like Otto Dix, George Gross, stuff like that. I like artists that sort of show the sort of underbelly and uncomfortable aspects of humanity, like the kind of seething, wretched aspects of existence. And I'm kind of incapable of making anything beautiful, and so you identify with the artists that kind of are useful to you in a way. I'm trying to think of other artists off the top of my head. I'm going to do a little show up in a group show up in New London, Connecticut, and they asked me to make a painting about New London, and so I, of course, made a painting of Berkeley Hendricks, because he's like a great favorite of mine and influence, I guess, in my work, and he was a New Londoner. I mean, people don't know that, but he's an incredible artist. There's too many to even name, but I could keep on going all night if you want, Rob.
No. That's great. And I had to pat myself on the back. You didn't see me doing it, but when you said R. Crumb, I was like, okay, the brain still works, and my eye still works. I'm seeing what I'm seeing, and so that's
Absolutely.
wonderful. And thank you, because I've got multiple tabs open of different references, the different influences that are there, and it's like, all right, looking that up, looking more of that up, and there we go. Because as I've said in this podcast, that I have conversations with you guys. You think it's for me to interview you guys and have you guys share your story? No. It's to make me seem more interesting. That's really what this podcast is about. This is an ego stroke, if anything. But so I want to switch gears a little bit, and it's going to be another question I want to revisit on, but I at least want to go to this piece, especially where we were talking at as far as some of the folks that you've worked with and gotten those sort of like those relationships with, maybe that sort of modifying your or not modifying, but adding to the way that you think about your work and going through sort of your work. At what point? And I think a lot of people listening to this will feel this question. At what point did you fully commit to, like, I'm going to be an artist? Like, yeah, because it's those moments when we have to take the leap. And as I was sharing before you and I got started, I'm at one of those inflection points myself. So I'm very curious.
Okay. Well, there's different points that one could point to, but when you tipped me off to some of these questions, so I gave this a little bit of thought, and I'm going to go with this. So when I went to college, I thought that I would be going to finance. I would be an economics major. My dad worked for a bank, and the school I went to, economics was like the most popular major, and so it just seemed like what one would do. I grew up in an affluent suburb in Westchester after we lived in England, and all of the parents were basically business people of one sort of another. They might have been a doctor, a lawyer, a business owner, a guy working on Wall Street, that sort of thing. So if you grow up in that sort of environment, those are the things that you think are the possibilities that things you could do when you grow up. And so it never even occurred to me that being an artist was a possible profession. It was just sort of like a hobby. But then I went to college, and while I was taking economics classes, I wasn't really paying much attention in them or doing much work in them, but I always took an art class because I enjoyed art and I knew I could get a good grade in it because I knew I would work very hard in it. And during my sophomore year there, I had this professor, this guy Archie Rand, who was an interesting character and an excellent artist in his own right, but sort of, at least within art schools in New York, I feel like a kind of like a famous art educator. Like everyone has a story about Archie or an opinion on Archie. But so I took this class, and I think pretty early on, Archie realized that I was like putting in more work than I necessarily needed to in the class, and so I came to him and I was like, Archie, I love this, and like, what can I do more? And he's like, okay, this week for homework, you're not going to do what I tell everyone else to do. You're going to make me 20 paintings. And so I that week I went down to Pearl Paint. This is back before Dick Blick had taken over the art supply industry. And I got myself, like 20 of those canvas boards, and I made 20 paintings of this, that, and the other thing. And I came into class the next week and I put them out in the hallway because he used to do little critiques in the hallway. And he looked at them for a few minutes and I said, so what do you think, Archie? And he's like, well, I think you need to do 20 more. And so I went back and I did 20 more the next week. Bring him in, and I show him, okay, Archie, I made 20 more paintings. What do you think of these? And he's like, shit, kid, I don't know, but I know you're an artist. And so at that point, like, I kind of started to take myself seriously, and I decided I'd be like an art double major, economics and art, but I really wasn't doing any work in my economics classes. In fact, I managed to get, I think it was a C of some sort. I don't know if it was a C minus or C plus, but the school I went to, the grade inflation was such that anything in the C range was a tantamount to failure. Like that was a good indication that I should not be doing economics. If in econometrics I managed to get something in the C range, and it wasn't even until the final class before the final exam when the professor was reviewing the material that I even realized that everything we've been working on for the entire semester had been one regression. And it's like, oh my God, I'm so fucking lost. And so I better go into art. And then I became an art major with an econ minor, and I've never used that econ for anything. And I've become an artist. So there we are.
Thank you. That's great. It's like that econ piece is slowly sliding. I was like from double to minor to I don't use that. And yeah, like I had to come to a point where I thought I was gonna be a rapper at one point. That was a thing, and I thought I was gonna be a comic book artist, and that was a thing. And I did the whole I did business school but did the science side, like bachelor's of science, and did the analytics. But I was always looking for the sexy creative work, and then having the analytics sort of like back end fill that. It's like that's what I would get in with, because there's no money in art, the thing they were all told. And there's no career in it. How will you eat? You wear size 13 in shoes. You're getting bigger, so your shirts are more expensive. Things of that nature. And making sort of that choice, but coming to it after kind of losing sort of what that identity was. As a professional white collar moving up the corporate ladder, that wasn't going to be the long term for me. And I kind of got that at a relatively young age, of like 24. You shouldn't be burned out at 24. And that's when I discovered and really dove into the idea of podcasts. I was already like an audiophile, a radio nerd, but wanting to dive into that a bit further, and then finding those points where they kind of come together, right? Where I just remember I had and I think I've shared this story before, where I had maybe $500 left. I went across the street from my job to Best Buy. I was like between checks, and I was like, yo, what is the recording gear? I need a Fast Track Pro and a couple microphones. that was the story. That was the beginning of it. So realizing that relationship between having some funds and just the desire to do it. And 15 years later, we're still doing it.
Yeah, you were down to the felt.
100%. So I want to hear about this, and I may have saw this in an interview ad because, like I said, I do a deep dive. I saw maybe some videos out there, a few different things. So let's talk a little
Oh
bit about
boy.
your first exhibition. I want to hear a bit about that.
Well, I think yes, I know what you're asking about, but it wasn't actually my first
Okay.
exhibition. So if you want me to talk about my first exhibition, the first exhibition I did was a show in Tokyo, which was in 2001. But I think what you're asking about, because I see that twinkle in your eye, Rob, is you're probably talking about the Tompak stuff. Is that correct?
Please, yes.
Okay, so that was sort of my second show, I guess. So around 2001, I started making. My glasses keep on fogging up here.
Thank.
Sorry, just keep on having to wipe them. I started making paintings of rappers. I've been kind of interested in celebrity portraiture of different kinds for a little while before that. Mainly because celebrity portraiture is kind of like the sort of basement of art, like it's really like the sort of like the most base and cheesy area of art. And so to me, it's very interesting area to be in, mainly because I think that celebrity is kind of the lingua franca of American culture. Like people can all identify with the celebrities because we all know who they are, and you need a common language to be able to communicate. So, I may have a very different experience than someone who grew up in like Compton, California or whatever, but we both understand who Tupac Shakur is. You know what I mean? Like, and so we can have a conversation based on that. And there's a lot of conversations that have to be had in this country because there's a lot of terrible things, and we have a lot of history that's gone on in this country we were all very aware of. Now, so where I'm going here. So after around 2001, I started making kind of like icon paintings of like gangster rappers. And at the time, I was thinking about these things as being like sort of a white boy identity art. Like I grew up in an affluent, essentially white suburb of Westchester County, and there, in my high school, there were no black kids. Like I knew nothing about where I perceived American culture was not being made in Bronxville, New York. It was being made in the Bronx, and I was aware of that. I knew that the stuff that I was interested in was coming from this part of the country that I had nothing to do with, but I was learning about it all from music television. And so I was thinking about this, and so the most obvious read of these paintings, I might take Biggie or Tupac or whatever, and sort of fit them into like a painting of Christ, like a Byzantine icon painting, and I would use sort of hand gestures that were like gang signs or something, like they were the hand signals or whatever that the saints and icon paintings would be making, because these things would communicate different things to people who understood the language of Byzantine icon painting, or the different colors would mean different things, like different pigments were more valuable or less valuable, and so they were associated with different saints or biblical characters. Anyway, the point was I had this whole rationale about painting these guys who, to me, were characters that I venerated. But while I venerated and I loved hip hop music, I also knew I wasn't really meant to be painting them. Like there was something a little bit taboo about me, being sort of like a cultural carpetbagger and like kind of. It was unconscientious, we'll say. But that to me, that was the issue in the painting. Like I've always been attracted to work that is a little bit transgressive. And I think one of the functions that art can have in the culture is to be transgressive and to to push boundaries and ask questions through doing things that people find uncomfortable. And so this seemed like an interesting place for me to be, especially as like a young guy. You want to like kind of draw attention to yourself by doing things you shouldn't do. Anyway, so I did this for a little while, and the paintings got a little bit more elaborate. After a while, I was making like these Renaissance paintings. I mentioned earlier like a Van der Weyden painting where it might be the scene where Tupac was killed in Las Vegas back in 1996, and so like I had him over the black BMW or whatever car it was that he was shot in, and like Suge Knight is there, and Afeni Shakur is in the painting, like as if she's the Virgin Mary, and I think I had like DJ Quick holding Tupac, and like Snoop Dogg was there, and Orlando Anderson, the guy he got in the fight with the MGM Grand before he got shot, et cetera, et cetera. And so like making this whole or illustrating this whole mythology that was laid out in all the different theories and kind of pop culture interpretations of Tupac's death. And so I was making paintings like that, and they started to get me a little bit of attention, but not much. But then I decided like I should do something a little bit more transgressive or radical to kind of really commit to the work. And so I decided I would do a project where I would try to transform myself into Tupac Shakur. And it would kind of culminate in the 7-year anniversary of his death. If you know anything about like all of the conspiracy and numerology around Tupac's death that's sort of laid out in the Machiavelli album, then you might, you know that 7 years was like an important time. He was meant to come back from the dead or whatever. And so I did all these sort of superficial things to change myself into Tupac. Like at the time, I probably weighed 190 pounds. So I decided I would try to lose some weight to get down to the weight that he had when he died, according to his driver's license. If memory serves, it was about 153 pounds. Now, I was a side note. Growing up, I was a high school wrestler, and when I'm asked about like experiences that like taught me the most about being an artist, I always say high school wrestling, because I went into high school wrestling thinking that it would be like being in the WWF or whatever, and in fact, it was nothing like that. I was not jumping off the top rope and doing suplexes. I was like sweating in a gym, getting my ass kicked by like other kids, and I learned a lot about pain and humiliation and hard work, and like that's a lot of what art's all about. It's not so glamorous in the trenches, But anyway, side note, I learned how to lose weight quickly doing high school wrestling, and so over the course of I guess 2 or 3 months, I lost some weight. I got some like sort of superficial modifications done to myself, like a nose ring, and I already had the earrings, if I remember correctly, from like high school. Because like back in the 90s, like everyone got earrings, I would do little things every day, like, smoke some weed, drink some Hennessy to kind of commune with Tupac. I had a blog where I would write about being Tupac, or like my reflections on his place in culture. And then I eventually got, some tat.
Wow.
There we go.
Wow.
There's Tupac. I didn't get all the rest of the tattoos. I had them all in magic marker on me. I shaved my head, but so in my blog started to get a little bit of attention. And back then the internet was a much smaller place than it is now. And so if you were to Google me back then, I came up pretty early in Tupac search results. And so ended up being, getting a little bit of attention in the media and all sorts of cool stuff happened. But I was very uncomfortable because like, I knew that what I was doing was something like I shouldn't be doing. I obviously wasn't in blackface, but it was about as close as I could get to being in blackface. And and that was kind of the point of the project. Like through my attempt to become more like this guy whose music I loved and I thought was such an important cultural figure, I was starting to look more and more like a neo-Nazi. And so that to me was poignant. So at the end of the day, I got some photographs taken by this wonderful photographer, this guy, Prescott McDonald, who found me over the internet, and he had done some work photographing other rappers. And so he, volunteered to take photographs of me. And when I sold the photographs, I gave him half the money, but I didn't want to make sure Prescott got paid because he made the project. But anyway, so I did an exhibition that kind of was the culmination of the project, where I exhibited some of my paintings of rappers. And I actually appeared in person, at least sort of dressed up as Tupac at this opening. That was the only time I was like ever really Tupac, not on the internet. Everything else was basically just me being him on the internet.
Yeah.
But I was at this opening of this gallery 31 Grand in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. This is back in 2003, I guess it was. And I remember the gallery. They got a lot of attention for this because the New York Post, I think it was, put an article in the newspaper the day or so before the show, with pictures of the paintings and talking about the project. And so they were getting phone calls from people who like were never been to an art gallery before, like, hey, can we come and see the Tupac paintings? Like, what does it cost? It's free. It's an art gallery. Just come on down. But also they were getting like phone call, like kind of death threats on me, like ones that were in jest. I believe, but I was very nervous about it. So I got like really drunk for the opening and basically sat in the corner, for the entire thing. But yeah, that was what you're asking about, and now you can give me your 2 cents about this.
No, that is. I'm looking at the picture right now, so I'm like looking at the picture and then looking at you. One of the ones that's like online currently, and I was like, that's very close.
Yeah, I look like a character from American History X.
No, I was thinking the same thing. I wasn't going to say it, but it's exactly the same thing. No, it's no. That's, I think, sort of being provocative, being transgressive. That's stuff that I've always been interested in, and having sort of the explanation and the discourse and the conversation around it. I think that's something that is almost gone. We aren't able to do that as much these days. It's just kind of like, well, this is what this person's intent was. It's like, no, let them share their piece, and then from there, be able to kind of sort and parse through, okay, what is the meaning? Is this person kind of goofy? Is this person bugged out? Or was this an attempt to say something artistically and have sort of their 2 cents towards it? Because, as you touched on like earlier, it's sort of everyone's, the sort of like art macroly is sort of for everyone, what came before. So
yeah, well, and the what was key to this project was that, and why I couldn't do it today for the reasons you're talking about. Like I would be, I would get dragged in all sorts of ways over the internet these days for it. But I tried to present it in a way that it didn't immediately make itself clear this was an art project. I think part of the point was that I was doing something that looked really reprehensible, but as you looked into it more, or if you emailed me or interacted with me, I would explain this was about my own ambivalence about the way that, Black masculinity was being sold to me as a white consumer of it, and like how awful and problematic this was. And I'm aware of that. But on the other hand, I love the music, and I think the music is incredibly important culturally. It's sort of the successor to punk rock. It's about nihilism. It's about social issues. These guys making the music aren't actually the gangsters that they purport to be, but Tupac paid for his the authenticity which he tried to achieve with his life, which is obviously tragic and so sad because he was clearly an important and incredible artist, and he sort of took it too far and he died, in a horrific way. So it was important to me that I was the asshole in the project. It was about my sins or the kind of the sins that I represent as an American consumer, and I'm willing to take responsibility for. You can say the project is racist, and it may very well be, but racism is an important part of this country, and we have to reckon with it if we're going to move forward. And I for one want to acknowledge my complicity. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And we have these things that are Tab, I recently had a conversation, and we weren't talking race per se. We were talking about sort of death, right? We, had this idea of all of these things that are right in front of us. So we know what they look like. We know when we see them, but we don't talk about them, or we talk about them in a very specific way. And then there's sort of a cutoff point. And for me, I want to understand the thing fully before I just say, oh, okay, no, yeah, this person's racist POS, or, death, moving on to something else about life. It's like I rather have a better understanding of it to really have a concentrated and really direct and efficient version of why I don't mess with this, or why, this is part of the conversation. It doesn't, I think a lot of times we want a specific response. We want agreement versus something that is going to make us think or even feel. I think that's something we become more and more sort of numb to these days. I know recently there was this one artist, I think he was a designer, and he got into this spot where he was doing I think he did some work, and it had like a sort of racial tone to it. And before he was able to really speak on what his meaning and what his thinking was in the work that he was putting out, he had these prints that looked like watermelon, that old trope. And it's just like, oh, this is racist. And I was like, no, let's hear the full thing. Let's better understand this. No, this is racist. This is trash. Get rid of it. And I think that's selling people short. I think people are smarter than that to actually be able to have the conversation, to understand, like, is this satire? Because I think it was like a designer brand. It was like a big brand. Or is this one of those things where, I like white people, but also white people a little sneaky sometimes, and they kind of work
Yeah.
in one of these sneak disses. Is it one of those as well? And that's sort of the thing. But I think if we don't allow for that conversation to really understand it, we can't delineate between what's what. It's like sort of
Yeah, that I feel is the shame of sort of a knee-jerk cancel culture, is that you really you can't talk about race without it getting awkward. And something like my little art project here, the nice thing about it is it allows you and me, and from the looks of things, you're probably an African American man. It allows us to talk about race in a relatively direct way, and it makes it a little bit more comfortable because we can talk about this stupid project that I did. But these are conversations we kind of need to have, and we understands we have to come to, yeah, like. It's tricky to talk about, it's a conversation, you and I, even if we were old friends who were having, beers at a bar, it'd be hard for us to talk about, but perhaps this gives us a way. And this is not certainly the only function of art, but it's one thing that art can do. Art can do lots of different things, but it can be an arena for us to talk about uncomfortable stuff. I like this is one of the projects that while I always sort of dread talking about it, but it's one of the things I've done that I'm more proud of, because I think that there's a real ambiguity and ambivalence in the work. I don't think it's didactic in any way. It's not trying to be woke or anything like that. I'm trying to be express like a real true position. Like, I truly believe that the fact that American culture is pretty much predominantly invented by African American people for the last, 400 years, but certainly the last 100 years, is one of the ways that we can move forward and hopefully improve situations, because it's really hard to be, racist when you realize you love Michael Jackson or Tupac or Barack Obama. Like that's the beginning of understanding. And I think that a lot of people like me from the place I came from, learned initial things through popular culture, and it's important stuff.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And being in that sort of, like, I think you and my partner in the same sort of age group or what have you, and hearing how, like, part of, like, let's say the MTV or any of that different stuff, like the sort of the pop culture component, that's sort of one of those exports. And my partner's black, so she was like, I'm in it. But in this sort of way of like, how is this being exported? And it's like, well, this is what's being sent to me. This is what I'm seeing, this version of it. And it's just like, how are the real black people? How are these real communities? And being once they're exposed to it, like you mentioned like WWE earlier, or WWF at the time, and I thought of this wrestler who's currently wrestling, who was on the Real World, and Mike Mizanin, the Miz, or what have you, and
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I
I
just
remember
remember
him.
him being on there, and he was like, yeah, I'm from this part of Ohio, never been around black people. Dude was like 24,
Hmm.
and just sort of like he was having conflicts because he wasn't around anyone. And I was just like, wonder what kind of content you're in. But then seeing sort of that exposure and that sort of understanding and that sort of development over now the last 20 or so odd years, it's just like, oh, okay, you just weren't around it. You weren't exposed to it. The stuff that you were getting and your feed, if you will, probably wasn't indicative of culture, or it was indicative of sort of the more negative, more hyper, more maybe violent, or some of the unsavory parts of it. You don't know what to go with from that.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
So
moving on.
I mean, where's the beers? But so I got two more real questions, and I want to hear a little bit about like imperfections. As I see folks, works not ready to show into us absolutely perfect. I remember back in the day, you remember in Goodfellas, right? When they're talking about shaving the friggin' like garlic or what have you, has to be
Oh
trimmed.
yeah, I got a great system. Or was it like Paulie had a great system? He would shave like, yeah.
So that used to be me editing these podcasts. It's like, all right, I got to trim this pause out to the nth degree. I got to get it razor thin. So,
Hmm.
and it kind of takes away from what the thing is. It's a conversation. It's not just words perfectly strung together. It's actually a conversation. So, ums and coughs and things of that nature. You try to dampen it to refine it, but ultimately the imperfections are a part of it. How do you view imperfections as it relates to your work?
Well, my work is very imperfect. Like when you're making a painting, the drawing is sort of the armature that everything hangs off. And if you don't draw things correctly, you can't paint your way out of that.
Mm,
Like if you want to, and there's different ways that people can kind of use to get around imperfections in their own drawing ability. Like, these days there's a lot, it's very easy to project something, or or use digital means to make up for your lack of drawing skill. But well, for a long time I've kind of realized that the way that I draw things, and the where I mess up are kind of my style. Like I like it when the work is a little bit wonky and a little bit funky. Because I'm not trying to compete with a photograph. If you're going to make paintings of people and they're meant to be specific people, you need to communicate who they are, or the painting isn't particularly effective. Like this painting behind me is, and you probably seen the painting before, and that's why you knew it was Don Mattingly. But it has to look enough like Don Mattingly that it would be recognizable. But if it was like a photo realistic reproduction of Don Mattingly, it wouldn't interest me particularly, because I just get the photograph. But so I kind of embrace my sort of mediocre drawing and use it as my style. Um, I sometimes I think I should take a class in caricaturing, because like I'm always amazed by people who can, with very efficient amounts of line and drawing, can get the essence of a person's character, through overemphasizing a particular feature, like be it the jaw or the nose or whatever the case may be. I've never been able to do that consistently. Sometimes I kind of get it, and sometimes I don't. but I have to kind of work things far enough so they are recognizable as the person I'm trying to make, communicate that who they are in the painting. For me, this painting doesn't work if it isn't Don Mattingly, or if I make a painting of, I don't know, like Ice Spice or something. I got a painting over there of Ice Spice. It has to look like her, but it also has to look a little warped or distorted, or
Yeah.
it wouldn't interest me particularly. Like, this is why I am interested in or identify with particularly German expressionists, because I guess they felt that their maybe technical insufficiencies communicated something about the inner life of themselves, or their subject matter, and then they could show angst through kind of wonky drawing, or angular lines or something like that. And I like that idea because it works with what I'm doing. Yeah, like I feel like mistakes are style, and I like to make a few big mistakes as opposed to like a lot of little ones. It's my life is a few big mistakes.
That's great, and it's funny because as I look at the Donnie baseball drawing, I'm like, is his neck that long? I start thinking of the actual picture now.
No,
Like
no,
the
I tried
actual.
to, what I tried to do? I tried to get like the feeling of the action of his swing in his body, like, which was, that was what I was trying to do there. And so I really wanted to get him, like sort of coming over the ball, and he's about to really take a big cut on that ball. And also the fact that, he's a compelling New York sports star to me, in that he didn't ever win a championship. And so he's kind of like an Aeneas kind of character. He's like sort of battling for Rome, but he's not particularly successful. I find that, and that's why I love Patrick Ewing too. The sports heroes who don't quite succeed are the ones that I identify with, because most of us don't quite succeed in the end.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir, brother. All right, so here's sort of the last real question, and I got a few rapid fire questions that I've been feverishly updating as we've been talking. So this one I'm very curious about, especially like now we're AI is a thing. We have sort of social media and big business. I've recently dove back into the Death of the Artist book. And, as I think about books, anyone can write a book, anyone can self-publish or what have you, anyone can make art. We've seen with AI, you can now sound like rappers. You can use their specific voices. And it makes it harder and harder to distinguish the good and interesting work from the mid and stuff that just feels like a commodity. Do you think we value creativity like more or less, or what are your thoughts on in that climate?
Oh, gee, so of your questions, this is the one that I really wasn't sure how I was going to answer this. We certainly say that we value creativity. Like every third person you meet is a self-described creative, and creative is not a term that I particularly like. Like, I remember when I was in college, I think my dad or some relative of mine like asked, "So you want to be an artist?" I was like, "No, I don't want to be an artist. I want to be a painter. Like, I want to do this thing." Like, to me, like being an artist was like a lifestyle, and being a painter was like actually doing the work, if you know what I mean. And to me, if you or anyone else self-identifies as a creative, like this is not about you. It's about my own hang-ups.
Sure.
But I don't like the term creative for the same reason. It sounds to me like it's like a lifestyle thing. And being turned on to your blog was, I mean, your podcast was wonderful for me, because I like what you're doing a lot, because like you're making like this wonderful record of many different people who are doing important and interesting stuff. It may not be the stuff that's valued in every case by our culture, but it's all people who are like kind of putting in the good fight. And like I think that recording this stuff is really important, because it gives like a broad picture of what is going on at the granular level, the culture. Like, like art is not Jeff Koons or, or Jean-Michel Basquiat necessarily. That's like big mega culture at this point. Like art is what's being made by people who will not be appreciated and are doing it for the love of what they're doing. And I think it's important to have a record of this. And the wonderful thing about digital media is we have the ability to archive all this stuff. So, but my point is, I'm gonna keep on going around in like a tangent, but like I listen to a lot of these art podcasts, and many of them are actually marketing tools for like coaching programs for people who want to get like a bunch of benefactors to support their practice by giving them daily affirmations or something. And however you make your rent, more power to you. But that's not very interesting to me. Like I think that if you're going to do this, you don't need to have like a group of people cheering you on. Like people like I think yourself and I are going to do this with or without an audience. And, you have an audience because you do a good job of it. And so people come to you. But I think that even if you didn't, you probably would still be doing this. And same for me. Like, I've been incredibly fortunate in that I've been able to, for the last 20 years or so, make this into my career and not have to do anything else but fuck around in my studio all day. But that's not why, but no one gets into this for that reason. Like you're never going to get rich. Well, I guess it's technically possible, but incredibly improbable doing this stuff. You do it because you need to do it. And this may not be, I'm sort of going off well away from your question right now. So do we value creativity? I think that business values creativity because it realizes it gets all its good ideas from creativity. We don't really often put our money where our mouth is as far as valuing creativity because we value what we pay for. But I think that there is creativity in all aspects of culture, business, fashion, things like that. I think it's a great time to be someone who's interested in doing this because things like social media and the arts give us access to people that would have been very hard to get access to before them. In fine art, for instance, before the invention of Instagram, if you wanted people to see your work, you basically had to have an art show at a prestigious art gallery and hope that someone writes a review about your work. And there's like about 5 people in the world writing art reviews. And then like maybe you get into a magazine and a bunch of people see your work. But the probability of that happening is incredibly slim. Now, there's other ways to approach this. You can certainly still sell your art through art galleries, art fairs, art auctions, things like that. But there's other ways. There's many more people, I think, making a living off selling work over the internet through commissions at lower price points, frankly, but to people around the world because a lot of people value art and will pay hundreds or maybe a few $1,000s for a painting, but these are not the kind of transactions that make sense to happen in art galleries because of the overhead of an art business. And so, now I've kind of forgotten the question, but I think that the technology can be good for art. Yeah.
No, I think you're good. I think you're good in sort of like covering sort of your thoughts in that. I think you touched on a lot of pieces that I share. I share your sentiments on. And yeah, I think it's definitely something that's covered in the sort of death of the artist like book.
Yeah, I read that book. Or actually, when I say read, I mean I listened to it on podcast because I mean on the audiobook because that's how I read everything by listening. To it. It was pretty good. I actually found it sort of. It was a year or so ago, but I found it kind of encouraging. Although I don't think that was the point of the book.
Yeah, and sort of like, I think it's I think it's a 2020 release, and I just remember certain things that they were talking about, and then seeing them happen live and in color, like the notion of folks that are leaving, quote unquote, the centers where your work is discovered, and then they're pulling up to places like Baltimore, and I'm like, I'm in Baltimore, and kind of some of the stuff that I'm seeing now in the cycle of like this sort of 4 years, or the book was released in 2020, but I'm sure maybe written probably prior to that. And I'm like, oh, okay,
Mhm.
cool. This makes sense. This is kind of
So
here.
you're seeing that on the ground in Baltimore. Like there's a bigger art scene than there was 15 years ago when you started the podcast.
So I started podcasting 15, but this has only been 5 years. This podcast is only 5 years
Oh,
old,
okay.
and yeah, I think the scene has shifted a little bit. I think it's always been a lot of artists, always been a lot of creative folks who may not use the term, but I feel like a better term. They do an artistic thing. They pursue art, and it's that thing where some of the sort of uglier gatekeepery weird things that happen in these sort of larger scenes are starting to creep down here and have a bigger place, and
Mhm.
that's been very weird. And this notion of folks leaving because of the resources not being here, and you're already priced out of going to a New York, can't afford it. You're priced out of
Mhm.
going to a Philadelphia, the quote unquote what these hubs used to be to get discovered and to blow up. And it's like the resources aren't necessarily down here in a big bad way, but the sentiment is down here that you can't make it, that is flooded and is crowded. So that's what I've been seeing in the
Oh,
conversations that I've been
really?
hearing.
It feels because yeah, art doesn't feel super crowded here in a way that it used to. But the thing is, like, I'm old now. Like, I used to know tons and tons of artists. Like, when I first got out of school, not immediately, but after maybe a year, I moved to a loft in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and this is back when Bushwick was kind of a hairy place.
Yeah.
Like it was all stray dogs and like insurance fraud on my block. Like there's another burned out car every day outside of the building that I had a loft in with a couple friends. Like, but then everyone in my building was an artist of some sort or another. But the thing is, there's a lot, and now I don't know too many artists. And I don't really like hang out with artists. I kind of hang out with the parents of my children's friends and stuff like that. But that may just because just your life changes as you get older, of course there's a lot of attrition in art, and yeah, I'm just so my major career goal is just to keep on doing this until I'm 80, if I last that long, and then then drop the paintbrush and jump in my grave.
No, like that's sort of one of the things I started thinking of, like what is sort of the phase, because as I was touching on earlier about, and I think it's something about the uniqueness, as you were touching on, of I would still do this because I'm curious. You would still do what you're doing because it interests you, and following your interests has been this sort of sentiment that I've gotten in there, asking these questions and using your art as a way to present these questions. And you know in teaching, in this last like year, I've had to kind of re-explore certain things, and really address some of the things that have bothered me, specifically when it comes to like podcasting. Like, I've talked to quote unquote fine artists, like white dudes telling me that basically I ain't shit, and when I'm getting grants. I was like, I could wring your neck right. I'm 6'4". I'm a giant guy, by the way. And I was like, I'm offended by this, but having to see where I'm at and almost doing the performance thing for a group of, well-meaning
Mhm.
folks that don't necessarily look
Mhm.
like me. And it's money, and it feels all weird. And
You're
it's
being very diplomatic.
I am. And being very in front for presentation, or in these other instances, working, at an art school, teaching there and teaching sort of this as a medium or what have you, which, you're aware of, you're a worldly dude or what have you, like you can do theater through this, you voice acting, so on. And for someone to short-sighted and say podcasting is not any form of anything, it's just, bullshit, for lack of a better term. It's a weird thing to say, because and it's very short-sighted. So in speaking with my students and kind of, preaching from that position, and I'm like, look, just get on Instagram. I know all of you got it. And just look at how similar all of these things are. Does anyone feel like they have a unique voice? Do they feel like they're really into the thing that they're so passionate about? It all looks the same, is all presented the same. I don't think if this doesn't blow up, if they're not 10x in their business, bro, then they're not going to continue doing it. Whereas someone like me, someone like you, we're going to continue doing it because there's something else that drives it, something else in the engine.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
the
that's
thing I try to kick across.
podcasting. I think is similar in many ways to painting, in that it's a way that you can produce culture really at a very affordable price point. You know what I mean? Like it's something that a single individual can do, and you can reach a lot of people, and so it's a very effective medium for like a single operator in the culture. And the wonderful thing about a vocal medium, and it's been said a lot before, but because podcasting is kind of functions like radio, like National Public Radio or whatever, in that you can really get a relationship with a voice in a way that you can't have a relationship with television. It's much more intimate. Hearing someone talk to you, and it's very personal. And that's why I think, I don't know any artist who doesn't listen to a ton of podcasts, because it's a way to stop the voice in your head. You can have Rob's voice in there, which is it's a lot more productive to listen to you than to listen to this asshole.
That's a great mic drop. I'll take the passive kudos there. And because we're coming up on it, I want to definitely dive into. I got 4 rapid fire questions for you. I think we've beaten the dead horse. We rode the dead horse and then we've beaten it. That's what we've done. We've done it well though. To the glue factory. So here's the first one. Where are you more likely to find inspiration? Cafe, bar? What is the location that you're most likely to get like an idea that just it's right there?
New York City, man. Like that. The reason I haven't left this place, and it's a pain in the neck living in New York. It's expensive and everything's more difficult here than it needs to be. But this place is teeming with life. Like you cannot walk down the street without seeing some bizarre thing going, like a couple having a fight in public, or like some guy walks onto the subway and produces a piece of human feces out of a paper bag or something. It's a cliche, but there are many more than 8 million stories in this city, and I find it exhausting sometimes. But when I'm not here, I crave the energy that this place is just pulsing with, and so that's why I'll live here my entire life, even though I have a love-hate relationship with it. So
Yeah,
New York.
That's wonderful. I will say. What I was touching on before we got started, when I was up there last, like I was in this sort of, man, you don't love me, man, sort of vibe, and came up there and encountered a few of my friends that were up there who just were really genuinely happy to see me. One of my friends was in there for a show, was in the country for a show, came from Denmark. And I was like, oh my God, Rob, how are you? And I was like, hey, this is amazing. And
it's like a small town here, because you have to walk around.
Yep.
You rub up against like 100,000 people every time you get on the subway. And so it's like, I can't take a trip downtown without running into one person I know at this point, because I've lived here for 30 years, you know what I mean? And it's not like I know that many people, but it's like a small town, but it's massive,
100%. Next question I got for you. What is your go-to comfort food? Like, is there a food that you're like, this is amazing? Like,
it's beer. That's my go-to comfort food.
It's great.
I'll be going to it right after I get off the mic with you.
What kind of beer do you like? And don't say IPA. If you say IPA, I think this whole interview is done.
Well, then I won't say it. I'm really not that discriminating, Like I have I can see the value in all types of beer. Like I like macro brews and I like micro brews. Like if you're gonna go to a baseball game and have 6 or 7 of them, you probably don't want to be drinking IPAs. You want to be drinking Miller Lights. You know what I mean?
This is true. I'm a snob when it comes to beer. I like the top 2 Japanese beers. That's literally my beers of choice.
So there's Sapporo and Asahi. What are they?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And on occasion, I haven't had it in a while. On occasion, I'll have the Kirin Ichiban. And it's like, that's where I'm at. But, I'll look at someone's like, if you have a Yingling, I'll have that, I suppose.
Yingling's one of the worst beers there is, in my opinion. Like there's few beers that I will try to avoid. And then, Yingling's one of them. No shade on Pennsylvania, but you know.
And this is brought to you by our sponsor, Yangling. Get in on it. Um, so, do you have a favorite movie?
Hmm. You know, I tend to like movies that are about like sort of depressed middle-aged guys. You know, like I liked that movie. Any movie like Paul Giamatti, for instance, I'm gonna like that. Like I'm not sure favorite movie, but like I really loved that movie that he put out recently about the guy, the boarding school teacher. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
I forget what it was called. Yeah, I don't know if I have a favorite movie, but like there was a period a couple years ago I kept on watching Mississippi Grind over and over again. You
Yeah.
know,
You were talking about The Holdovers, by the way.
oh the holdovers, yeah, the holdovers, yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's like kind of my genre. Like I'm not like much of an action movie guy or like a Marvel movie guy. Like I kind of like movies about just like sad sacks.
I mean, I'm a big fat liar head. I love Giamatti in it.
No.
Ridiculous. All right, so here's the last one I got for you. So excluding yourself, from this, you know, who name someone who's low key like an underappreciated New York icon.
Mm.
Notice how I threw you in there, by the way.
Underappreciated. There are so many. Like that's the great thing about this place. Like, so to answer, if you're down in Baltimore. Sorry, yeah, you're down in Baltimore. So you don't this. He's not the answer, but this. Have you heard of this guy New York Nico?
No.
So New York Nico is this fascinating and interesting guy. He's become like massive on Instagram and TikTok, etc. But he's a filmmaker who goes around New York and he like kind of gets idiosyncratic New Yorkers on the mic or on film, and he like does these little reels of them. And I don't have a specific answer who like my I've discovered so many interesting people, and then you end up running into them through him, but now because they're on his Instagram feed, if I say one of these people, it'll seem like an obvious, easy answer. Because like everyone in New York knows who they are now. Like everyone knows who George the Messiah is, who plays basketball
Yes.
down at the Cage. That guy. I got to meet him last summer down there, and he's just a fascinating guy. Like I'd heard that he was like in his 70s and he's a cab driver, but I got to meet him, and I also met some other basketball players down there who play with him, and like he's not fucking 70, he's like 40. He just has a big beard. It's great. But and here's this guy, the snowman,
Yeah.
I think is a really fascinating New Yorker. He's not really a New Yorker in that he's only lived here for like 10 or 12 years, which really makes him a New Yorker. But he's a graffiti writer who lives in my neighborhood, who I managed to sort of through Instagram connect with him. Like I followed him for ages and was kind of fascinated with his work. And then one day, and occasionally I'd send him a message or like tag him on something. One day I was at an art opening at the Bronx Museum. It was the Henry Chalfant show of his photographs of graffiti on trains from like the late 1970s, I guess. Anyway, so I'm there with my wife, and it's a crowded opening, and there's all sorts of hip New Yorkers there. And some dude comes up to me and he's like, starts talking to me. He's like, I don't know what we're talking about. But after 5 minutes, I'm like, hey, I don't remember who you are. And he's like, I'm the snowman. And that was like the coolest thing ever. But if you haven't ever looked him up on Instagram, look up Snowman, Snoeman. It's the Snowman. But he does the most incredible and sort of generous work, in my opinion. Like he goes to bodegas or different people who have like food carts on the street, and like at his own expense, he offers to sort of decorate their stores or their carts. And he does like these incredible, colorful, beautiful murals just like all over their stores. And I happen to live not so far from him. That's why I was sort of obsessed with him, and it worked out that he must live in my neighborhood. And it's just like a joy to be around this stuff. You're walking down Amsterdam Avenue, and suddenly you see a liquor store that he's turned into like a big fiery inferno or something, or a bodega that looks like a beach in the Dominican Republic. And it's just and that's the thing about New York. It's sort of New York. It attracts people who like really couldn't fit in anywhere else because they do such weird shit. But here, there's so many weirdos that we can all sort of coexist, and so there's just so many people doing big, wonderful, weird things here, and that's what makes it such a pleasure to live here, and just people like that. And so if you can find a million of these guys and girls on Nico's Instagram feed. So those are the more recent generation of cool New Yorkers. Of course, there's many storied historic New Yorkers from like Lou Reed or I don't know, like Jim Jarmusch or like who are like other cool people you might run into on the street. Like I don't know. There's a million interesting New Yorkers, but Nico's a good place to find them.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's it. That's off the hot seat. That's off the rapid fire portion. So, we got it, I think. I want to do two things in these final moments. One, I want to thank you for coming on and spending some time with me.
Rob, let me thank you. I really just so appreciate what you're doing and that you took the time to interview me. I'm humbled and honored.
This has been wonderful. And then these final moments also, I want to give you the space and opportunity to tell folks where to find you. You shouting out other folks on their socials and their Instagram. Tell folks where to find you on Instagram, website, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
The website's really easy. It's tomsanford.com. And my Instagram, which is probably the best place to keep up with me like every other artist, it's Uberkunst, which is it's a sort of a strange Instagram handle, but there's a short story behind it, or not really a story, but it was my AOL screen name from like 1991, and so Uber like over like high like an Ubermensch, and Kunst art, so like kind of high art, and I just kept on using it, and so now. In this day and age, a lot of artists go by like sort of an artist name, and so. About like kind of half the people who maybe follow me or interact with me in any way, like think of me as Uberkunst, and the other half think of me as Tom Sanford. I should probably go with one or the other, but so on Instagram, Uberkunst.
There you have it, folks. I want to again thank the great Tom Sanford for coming on to the podcast and spending some time with me. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.